Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here today with my colleagues, and let me start by saying Happy Pride Month. Today, and over the course of the month of June, we will hear a lot of statements of support for the LGBTQ2+ community. It is certainly appropriate to celebrate the progress we have seen to date, but we need to back those statements up with a commitment to real, tangible, meaningful action that we still need in Canada. We are here today to call for an end to a blatantly discriminatory policy that perpetuates stigma against the LGBTQ2+ community. Many Canadians may not be aware of this policy. Currently, any male who has sex with a male is ineligible to donate blood for 3 months, regardless of behavior. For example, a monogamous gay couple are disqualified simply based on their sexual orientation, despite being exclusive partners. A policy that makes determinations based on sexual orientation as opposed to sexual practices doesn't need to do this. Instead, it perpetuates stigmas that give rise to discriminatory behavior against our community. It is long past due for the federal government to put an end to the stigma and discrimination that men who have sex with men face in this country. Today, we are calling on the government to do the right thing. Stop the legal games in court to silence gay men who are just asking you to keep your promises. It is nothing short of virtue signaling to go out during an election campaign twice and promise men that you would end it, and now claim it's out of your hands and you can't make that change. If you couldn't make the change, why did you promise it in the first place during an election campaign? We are not just calling on the Liberals to keep their promise. Conservatives are providing a safe, immediate, and balanced solution to do so. The Canadian Medical Association's membership and the All Blood is Equal campaign has called for this. It is safe, it is easy to do, it ends discrimination and stigma. It shows a young gay, bi, or trans Canadian that there is nothing wrong with you. And you deserve the same set of questions asked of you when donating blood as someone who is straight. Questions should not be based on your sexual orientation, but rather the risk should be assessed by your behavior. There is no reason that this should be allowed or needs to be allowed in Canada today. I want to end my comments with a direct message to the LGBTQ2+ Canadians and community as we start Pride. The time for virtue signaling and feel-good statements without action is over. This safe change is long overdue, especially as there is a clear solution before the government. The only thing that's missing is the political will of the Liberal government to get this done. It is time to end the blood ban in Canada now. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Michelle Rempel.
Good morning. I'm incredibly honored to share the stage with my colleague, Eric Duncan, on this issue, who has done an enormous amount of work. Unlike Canada's homophobic policy, an overwhelming body of evidence from around the world shows that best practices for screening blood donors involve behavior-based questions. It's mind-blowing that in 2021, Canada still collects blood donations under a policy that is blatantly discriminatory. In 2013, the Conservative government ended the lifetime ban on men who have sex with men's ability to donate blood and replaced it with a 5-year deferral period based on advice from officials at the time. But since then, there's unshakable proof that blood donor criteria should be based on sexual practice, not orientation. In 2015, Justin Trudeau promised to take action and end the ban, and today, after nearly 6 years of power, the ban remains. In short, he's lied to the LGBTQ2+ community. We've been asking the government questions about this policy and expressing the need to end it for months. Frankly, I'm tired of watching my colleague Eric have to ask these questions in the House. Today, I'm sending a letter to the Minister of Health, which contains a draft order that utilizes existing regulations, which I believe she could enact today, which would end the ban. If she does not believe it's adequate, she has an obligation to explain what gaps in the legislation exists and take immediate action to rectify that. The federal government cannot be allowed to skate by on thin talking points suggesting that they can't make the change or that they can throw money at the problem and it'll go away. The federal government is the regulator on this issue. They have the power to introduce legislation if they have to make changes. They have failed to do this, and after 6 years, their motives must be questioned. There are no more plausible excuses for their lack of action outside of a comfort with allowing a homophobic practice to continue. I also want Canadians today, as we start Pride Month, to sign an official petition started by Miguel Arturo Pasamay of Calgary, petition E3656, that calls upon the Government of Canada to lift the ban on gay men's ability to donate blood. There are many health issues that the LGBTQ2+ community faces that we have an obligation to address. Access to mental health support, gender-affirming care, and more. The blood ban is but one of these issues, but it's a good place to start. We are committed to ending the ban, and the Liberals should be too. And now over to my colleague Bernard Généreux for remarks en français.
Merci Michel, Eric. Bonjour à tous. Je suis aujourd'hui avec mes collègues pour réclamer la fin d'une politique absolument discriminatoire qui perpétue la stigmatisation de la communauté LGBTQ2+. Actuellement, tout homme qui a des relations sexuelles avec un autre homme ne peut donner du sang pendant 3 mois. Par exemple, un couple de personnes gays et monogames ne peut donner du sang uniquement en raison de leur orientation sexuelle, même si ces 2 personnes sont des partenaires exclusifs. Des preuves sont de plus en plus nombreuses venant du monde entier, montrent que les pratiques exemplaires pour sélectionner les donneurs de sang comprennent des questions sur le comportement sexuel et non pas sur l'orientation. Il est surprenant qu'en 2021, le Canada accepte toujours des dons de sang dans le cadre d'une politique ouvertement discriminatoire. En 2013, le gouvernement conservateur a mis fin à l'interdiction à vie aux hommes ayant des relations sexuelles avec d'autres hommes de donner du sang et, selon l'avis des fonctionnaires, l'a remplacé par une période d'exclusion de 5 ans. Depuis, il existe des preuves irréfutables que les critères sur les donneurs de sang devraient être fondés sur des pratiques sexuelles, pas d'orientation sexuelle. En 2015, Justin Trudeau a promis d'élargir et de mettre fin à cette interdiction. Aujourd'hui, après plus de 6 ans au pouvoir, l'interdiction existe toujours. Cette politique homophobe doit être éliminée. Et c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui nous sommes ici pour exiger la fin immédiate de l'interdiction aux personnes gays de donner du sang. Aujourd'hui, les conservateurs du Canada ont envoyé une lettre à la ministre de la Santé qui comprend un projet de décret qu'à mon avis, elle devrait déposer aujourd'hui même, afin d'entreprendre le processus d'élimination de l'interdiction. C'est le moment d'agir, pas de faire des beaux discours. Il est temps de mettre fin à l'interdiction aux gays de donner du sang. Merci beaucoup.
And we'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. As usual, 1 question, 1 follow-up per reporter. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions, commençant par les questions au téléphone. Comme à l'habitude, une question suivie par journaliste. Operator, do we have a first question?
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Si vous pouvez appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. La première question, the first question is from Rachel Eilel from CTV News. Please go ahead, your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Good morning. So I understand that this approach would push the health minister to do this imminently. We have extensive understanding that this isn't necessarily quite that simple. I'm wondering if you could just elaborate a bit more on what exactly is that you are proposing could be changed imminently to see the policy updated effective today.
We believe that there is enough room for the minister to act on this within the existing regulatory structure that exists under the Food and Drug Act, broadly speaking. But again, if the minister feels that this is not adequate, that she has the power to change this, to clarify regulations, to enact new legislation. When there's a need for policy change, that's why Parliament exists. That's why the executive branch of government exists. So we've put forward a solution that we believe could work. The ball is now in her court. She can't just say, this is not my job, or, oh, I can't do this. No, it actually is her job. So we've put forward a productive solution. If she believes that it is not adequate, then she needs to tell us why, and also at the same time propose a change, not just throw her hands up and say, sorry, guys, can't do this.
Thank you. And to follow up, it's an opposition day motion in the House today, and the Conservatives are going on another issue. I'm wondering if there's any discussion within the caucus about if this is a priority for the party, bringing this forward as a opposition day motion today and having the entire House debate this issue.
I wish we didn't have to do that. I mean, the government has had 6 years to do this, right? And I'll put it this way. It is Pride Month. We have a month of action planned for this. I hope it doesn't take us another month and increasingly, higher levels of pressure on the government. They should just be doing the right thing on this. There's been so many times where, the opposition with this Liberal government, I remember when I had to put forward a private member's bill on the issue of a loophole with the bestiality legislation because they dragged their feet on it for 4 years. We have a plan, I will tell you that much. I highly encourage the Minister of Health to take action before we have to stand out here every day during Pride Month calling out their comfort with a blatantly homophobic policy.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Cormac McSweeney, City News. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hi. Yeah, there are arguments that the donation and transfer and administration of blood is ultimately a health decision, and that it should be health officials making that call rather than politicians. So, how do you respond to that argument when you're calling on the government to give a directive with on something that a lot of people see as something that should be a health decision?
There is a overwhelming body of evidence globally and domestically that that this policy that is blatantly discriminatory should be based on sexual practice, not sexual orientation. And also, it's just common sense. I mean, why would you discriminate against a monogamous gay couple? It's mind-boggling. I mean, there is a role for legislators to push back when there's an overwhelming body of evidence to change a policy that perpetuates stigma against a group of people in this country that have had to fight tooth and nail for equality of opportunity. That's our role as legislators. We can't tolerate this anymore. I mean, to perpetuate a stigma that somehow gay blood is unclean is morally repugnant. And there is an obligation of the federal government to take action on this. I actually can't even believe that I'm here having this conversation. I can't believe that my colleague Eric had to ask the Minister of Health in 2020 if she would take his blood and then have her chuckle at him. Like, it's just common sense at this point. Come on.
And as a follow-up, I would like Mr. Duncan to weigh in on that as well. But also for you, Ms. Rempel, I'm just wondering on a different topic, the mRNA vaccines and the mixing of vaccines. We're expecting NACI to update its guidance on whether people who receive viral vector vaccines like AstraZeneca could mix with mRNA vaccines for their second dose. We're expecting that guidance to be to allow for the mixing and matching. So I'm wondering what your response is to that, whether you have any concerns about the changing guidance of NACI, and then, Mr. Duncan as well on the blood ban issue.
I think, Cormac, if you're okay, I'll let Eric follow up, and then I'll get back on vaccines.
Good morning. Thanks for the question. To your comment or the question about our role as elected officials in this, I think it's our job to stand up for human rights and to call out discrimination and stigma where it exists. And I think the regulations are very clear, as we reference in our letter to the Minister of Health. She has the ability, and there's a solution that is there that keeps the blood supply safe and changes the questionnaire as opposed to going on sexual orientation to sexual behavior. I think there's science and there's evidence both domestically and many countries around the world that are going to this model. This isn't new. The science, I think, has been very clear on this. And I think as a role of parliamentarians, we have the opportunity to stand up and have our voice. The minister has the power, as we referenced through a regulation. And if she does not believe that that section is relevant or appropriate, she can create a regulation and that change. We're not just proposing to scrap it. We're going to keep the blood supply safe. We can do that. It's a very simple solution. It can be done. And it's about time after, again, and I make the argument, they have no problem during an election campaign going out and saying they're going to end the blood ban. Well, now is the time for action. They are in government. The Minister of Health has the ability to do it. We're referencing tools that are there, and we're saying if she doesn't believe the tools are there, she has the power to create those tools to get the change done safely, and something that's endorsed by the Canadian Medical Association membership and the All Blood is Equal campaign. Thanks.
Thank you. On the issue of the NACI advice that was released this morning, we have these perpetual questions because of an issue of supply. This has always been about vaccine supply in Canada, be it the eligibility of the AstraZeneca vaccine, some of the disastrous communications that came out of the federal government on quote-unquote preferential vaccines. It's all come back to supply. I think that the federal government is going to face many questions on sort of perpetually changing and conflicting advice. I think that many Canadians have questions about that too, the decision-making process, how that's happening, and why supply is such a key driver to this. I certainly encourage Canadians to avail themselves of this important public health tool, but more importantly, the federal government's got to get their act together on this. It concerns me that the narrative changes every week. So again, I don't think we would be having this conversation if the government had negotiated contracts and been able to secure consistent supply from all of the suppliers for which we purportedly have contracts with.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Rachel Aiello from CTV News. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Thank you for taking my follow-up. I appreciate that. I'm just wondering, it is Pride Month. Is the Conservative Party's policy still that the leader will only march in a Pride parade if police are invited?
Thank you. Well, we're all used to normal Pride Month celebrations. I certainly enjoy those festivities. Unfortunately, they're not happening this year in many parts of the country, which is why it's so important for us to be pressing for real action. We can celebrate the hard-fought rights that members of the LGBTQ2+ community in Canada have won over the years, but more needs to be done. And I think, a focus on action this year is very important. I'm glad to see, this morning my leader put out, the leader of the party put out I think a very affirming and positive video on this issue. I think it's important to see that type of messaging from all political leaders in Canada. But then we're here today with colleagues pressing the government for action, and I think that's going to be the focus of our Pride celebrations this year. But certainly, of course, we support and celebrate the rights of the community, and we very much acknowledge that there's a lot more work to do. And I think the message from the leader of our party has been that the Conservative Party of Canada is here to press the government on those rights and press for action.
So then, just to clarify, once we are able to have Pride parades again, can we expect to see Erin O'Toole marching whether or not police are part of that parade?
Well, I have learned long ago to never speak on behalf of the leader of my party, but I will say this. This issue has been very important to me as a member of Parliament. Over the last 10 years of my career, I've fought a lot of battles on this issue, and I've watched. We went through the battle of changing the definition of marriage in our party's policy declaration, and we won. To have a leader that comes out and is putting out proactive messaging, talking about the need to change this, it's very encouraging. I think we've come far, and I'm proud of the fact that as a country, our right of center party understands and acknowledges that there's no question that when we talk about supporting human rights, that includes and must, promote the rights, human rights within the LGBTQ2+ community. I'll just close with this. I had a moment standing here. Eric was up here talking about this a few minutes ago, and when I will always remember that moment because we've come a long way. The community needs our support and needs us to fight, especially in our role as official opposition, to stop some of the tokenization that happens within the community with this government. And I'm very proud to be on this stage today talking about these issues and fighting for these issues as my caucus and our caucus does as well, too. Thank you.
And we'll now take questions in the room. David?
Hi, David Thurton, CBC News. This government likes to call itself a pro-choice feminist government. You said that this policy banning gay blood is blatantly homophobic. Do you think this government is homophobic?
Well, that's a question for them anyway, isn't it? I will say this. The Prime Minister purports to be a feminist, has unresolved groping allegations, it has a defense minister that purportedly knew about sexual assault allegations within the most senior levels of the military and did nothing. They greenlit a candidate who had substantiated harassment allegations. They threw out a strong Indigenous First Nations woman from cabinet for speaking truth to power. That's not the hallmark of a feminist government. They purport to support new Canadians, yet the Prime Minister practiced blackface. And here we are talking about the fact that they've had 6 years to either introduce legislation or regulations to change this. It is a homophobic policy. So the question on whether or not they are perpetuating homophobia by supporting this, that's a question for them. But certainly there's no reason why this policy should exist.
Why is it a question for them? I mean, of course they're not going to call themselves, a bigoted, hateful description.
Look,
but you're in opposition. You have the opportunity to critique them. You're saying all these things. So are you going to make that value judgment?
Well, I mean, look, I think Canadians want action. I think, that the policy is certainly homophobic. Why they are supporting this policy, there is a question to be answered there, for sure.
And I'll check once more if we have one question left on the phone, operator.
Thank you. Merci. There are no questions registered on the phone at this moment. Il n'y a pas de questions sur le téléphone pour le moment.
And this concludes the press conference. Ici, me fait la conférence de presse. Merci.